Welcome to our monthly ACTS Town Hall. Thanks to our member companies for helping make these town halls possible. Your support makes our mission a reality. Together in safety, stronger in collaboration. The ACTS Town Halls are an open forum to discuss concerns and present potential solutions to improve damage prevention and excavation safety. These town halls are meant to be a discussion, and you're encouraged to ask questions and share solutions. A recording of this town hall will be posted on our YouTube channel and sent via email after the town hall has concluded. Before the end of the town hall, each of our panelists will highlight a moving forward step to ensure we stay focused on practical and impactful solutions. We are pleased to have a knowledgeable and experienced panel with us today. So to get us started, our moderator will begin with brief introductions.
All right, well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this town hall meeting. I'm honored and very privileged to be here today with four individuals who will be responding to a series of questions related to some important topics tied to late locates and some of the challenges that the 811 process has been witnessing over the past roughly 5 years. I want to say, to set this somewhat in context, we have had an interesting just over now 5 years with some significant cultural, economic events that have unfolded, of course, starting with the pandemic. Then as we were coming out of the pandemic, an infrastructure bill got a lot of people digging in regard to putting fiber in the ground. And what we in the industry have witnessed are some challenges, some pressures on that whole 811 process. And so today we're going to focus on that. And we do have a panel of distinguished industry specialists representing excavation and the locate arena to share some of their insights and thoughts about some of these challenges that we have been facing. So I'm going to now let the panel introduce themselves. I'd like to start with Eric, if that's okay. Eric, who are you?
Yeah, not a problem. My name is Eric McLeish. I'm Director of Operations for NPL Construction Company. We do underground construction, specifically gas in the Northern Virginia area. So I'm in charge of 45 crews coming out of the Virginia market, and then I've got another 30 crews coming out of Maryland, and we do a little bit in DC, when necessary. But 20 years in construction, all in underground construction, and I'm very pleased to be here. I don't pretend to be a subject matter expert in anything that Scott's going to ask me about, but I promise to be opinionated, and I'll do my best to work with everybody. Thanks.
Perfect. Well, welcome, Eric. Thank you for participating. And I guess we'll move over to Richard.
All right, Scott. Hey, I'm Richard Baitland. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for USIC, the U.S. Infrastructure Company. We have around 12,000 technicians doing locate services across the United States. Virginia is not one of those states right now, but we are looking at coming in there because there has been some pretty favorable regulation in that area. But my background is in telecom. I was with AT&T and Lumen Technologies. So I've been in locating now for about 2 years. So that's the extent of although at Lumen, I was in charge of the area that actually utilized the locate services. So I've got experience from being a customer of locate services as well as the supplier of locate services.
Very good. And how many years were you in the telecom side?
About 30 years.
About 30? Okay, so 30. Okay, well, welcome. Thank you. We'll move on with James.
I'm with Benton, Georgia now. I've been in the gas business since about 2000. I started with CenterPoint Energy in 2000. And after a few years, I went to work for a contractor, Mr. David Parker with Parkway. And I was with him until 2018, and he sold the company to T.L. Wallace. I was manager there for 7 years, and now I went to work with Benton as a director. Working with Benton, we got I'm in Mississippi, roughly about 120 employees, and that's what I'm currently doing.
Okay, Fantastic. Yeah. Well, welcome and thank you for that introduction. And last but not least, we have Juan in Virginia, a colleague of mine who also serves on the advisory committee in Virginia. So, Juan.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, Juan Vogel. I'm Vice President of Operations for Utiliquest in the Southeast. I cover from DC down to Florida and over to Tennessee. Been in the industry. I started as a locator in '94, so I've got about 30 years in the locate side of things. And I've been in, I guess, management for a little over 20 of those 30 years. So I'm looking forward to having a good discussion about, what's happening in the industry and seeing if some of these brilliant folks can solve it.
Yes. Well, I think we will definitely have some interesting insights today and some topics for future discussion and so forth. So welcome to all of you and thank you so much for participating. I guess we're going to begin with the questions. And the first question that I have for the panel is, did the issue of late locates at the level witnessed over the past few years, from your perspective in your unique areas, did that exist prior to the fiber projects? How have some of the changes or challenges changed rather with the introduction of fiber? And we'll maybe Juan, let you start with that.
Yeah. Let's just say the fiber didn't help anything, that's for sure. Unfortunately, I've got to say that, with new technology, with new things that impact our industry, I've witnessed fluctuations with the on-time performance or the late locates every time something like that happens. Unfortunately, with this last go around with the rural fiber, it's just really hitting us in a place where it's not very populated. So it's really created a bigger issue because we just don't have resources in those footprints to handle the volume of work that's coming in. And it doesn't help that it's not being regulated by the federal government, who released all these funds and didn't worry about what was going to happen to the municipalities and the local state governments in those footprints. So in short, yes, I believe it always occurs when a situation like this happens. And unfortunately, I don't see it changing for a while until something else changes.
Okay. Yeah, very good. And I hear you highlighting the rural area, that the focus has been on the rural area where resources maybe have been weaker to address the increase in business. Richard, have you, looking at your service area, have you seen something similar? Or what do you think in regard to the challenges in relation to fiber?
Yeah, definitely. Well, first I'd say that, fiber's not new, right? They started deploying fiber in the early 2000s with SBC and Verizon Fios, but a lot of it was aerial. And as the poles started getting congested, that drove a lot more underground, and that's what we're seeing now. I've definitely seen a deterioration of on-time performance over the last couple years, and it's directly related to the underground infrastructure projects that have proliferated. And I'd say the 811 system was designed primarily around residential locates, which are fairly standard in size and very consistent and predictable volume patterns. So it's easy to forecast and staff for that. When I started in this area about 2 years ago, 1% of our tickets were what we call project tickets. Over 2 years, that grew to 10%. So 1% to 10%, but that 10% takes up 40% of our labor. So if you think about it, this is very difficult to deal with. And as Juan stated, without some form of national standards out there to deal with ticket scope and ticket spray, daylight, weather, labor constraints, we're going to continue to see these problems. Now, we put in some mitigations that we can talk about later in this call, but ultimately it's going to come down to getting some rules that are more updated to the current environment.
Okay, yeah. So a recognition, yeah, there's some unique changes that have occurred and a suggestion of needing for some sort of regulation and regulatory oversight. James, how would you respond to that from the excavation side and what you've been seeing, especially with fiber pre and post?
I think the fiber definitely has increased late locates, but it's always existed to some degree, which Mississippi, to me, late locates ain't the biggest problems out there. I mean, occasionally you will have some late locates and different things, but that ain't one of our major problems in Mississippi. But it has been an issue, and one reason that I sit on these calls and different things is to try to be the solution and not part of the problem. I never try to point fingers at, hey, this is the locator's fault or it's the excavator's fault. I mean, we're all in this to make a living and make money. So we just got to come together and figure out solutions instead of who's at fault for. But I definitely think that the fiber projects has created a lot of havoc just by how large they are and how much extra they take. Like Richard said, fiber ain't just get here, but it has just like been mass produced. It's like everywhere you go. I'm sure in y'all states too, you see a boring rig and you look over there and there's orange pipe and there's handholds laying everywhere and everybody's running fiber. So it definitely takes up a lot of the locating resources, I think.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, definitely. And I do appreciate your sentiment there. It's very easy to tear things down. It's hard to build something new. And that's this, we can only do that in this case through the spirit of dialogue. And Eric, I know with you working in Virginia and such, you've done some interesting things with your company to address some of these challenges. And how have you seen this fiber impacting your area and maybe leading you to some of the things your company has been doing?
Well, so I would say, one, out of all of the questions that I thought we may anticipate today, this was one that I was a little bit fearful of, if for no other reason than I do feel like the Northern Virginia market, because of the way that it's grown and developed over the last 40 or 50 years, and the way that it's been a kind of planned development, with Loudoun County, Prince William County, and Fairfax County in particular. My perspective on late locates and how it correlates specifically to fiber is probably going to be very differently than folks in rural areas where they're really seeing this for the first time. For me, fiber was being put in the ground while we were putting the gas and the electric in kind of at the same time. When I would run into, late locates, it would be as part of like regulatory replacement work where we're going into more established communities and everything is above ground. And maybe the locating groups don't have the same amounts of resources readily available, and then I come in and deposit a whole bunch of crews to replace gas, and suddenly I'm absorbing a lot of resources all at once. So I have no doubt that fiber is driving late locates in certain areas. I'm just personally, as an excavator and what I'm consuming, I'm not feeling the same results as maybe some other folks. Now, with that being said, in 10 years of watching them tear down trees and build new homes in the counties around me, it was primarily, Comcast, Cox, and Verizon that was going into the ground. Now, as the government has begun to continuously expand beyond the limitations of just DC, there's all kinds of new private fiber and things coming in. I mean, just a couple miles down the street from my office, I swear they have drilled in, miles and miles of different types of fiber in the same intersection over and over and over again. So it certainly is a terribly large consumer of ticket volume. But anyway, I was just a little nervous that maybe my experience with late locates was not going to be felt in the same manner that other folks were, as specifically as it relates to fiber. I think as they continue with these initiatives, they're going more rural, which is kind of taking me away from like where I'm presently focused. So I'm probably not seeing the same constraints that everyone else is.
Yeah. No, good points. And it does bring up an issue about the division between rural and urban areas and what they're witnessing. And being in Virginia, I know the Northern Virginia area is a massive area for ticket volume. And I think I failed before we move into the next question. I failed to introduce myself in the beginning. I'm Scott Crawford, and I do serve as the president and CEO with Virginia 811. So we're working out of Virginia. And I also want to note that if anyone has questions, please put them in the chat. Share your questions. What we're going to do is, if we have time toward the end, we will fall back on some of those questions for the panel. But I've been told that we are also going to gather those questions and have them responded to by the panel and then published in an upcoming magazine that'll be distributed. So definitely put your questions in. So these are some great insights in regard to fiber and the impact it's had. So often, though, issues of this magnitude, they're not so simplistic to say one thing is the cause. Many times there's many variables that come together and create some of these kinds of issues. So in that line of thought, from your perspective, what are some of the factors, additional factors that have created this issue? Some of the challenges that we're facing in the whole 811 process, not necessarily just fiber, but what else? Or have there been secondary issues that have arisen because of the introduction of these large fiber projects? So maybe we'll let James respond and start us off with that question.
For that one, I think it has a lot to do with our economy. A lot of the stakeholders and cities, they can't afford the extra manpower. I think somebody might have mentioned that in the first statement, with that they put out all the money to expand this fiber and stuff, but a lot of stakeholders and cities ain't getting their portion of that to provide the extra manpower that it's taken to sustain this cost and stuff. And maybe that might be some of the cause for late locates trying to keep up with these bigger projects. Maybe some of the smaller projects are falling behind, and I think COVID had a lot to do with it. And I mean, I know everybody blames everything on COVID, but since COVID, a lot of the equipment and stuff we get just don't seem to be up to par as what things used to be. So I don't know. Maybe that has some issues to go along with all this.
Yeah, well, James, you're right. I mean, there were even some supply chain issues during one phase of this. With I remember, and the locator side can help me out, but some issues with even getting paint. That was becoming a challenge, having enough paint. So any other perspectives on that? Maybe Juan, from your side, from the locate side, and some of the variables that have impacted you.
Yeah, Scott, you remembered that correctly. There was our suppliers couldn't get the ingredients to do the paint. They couldn't get the aluminum to make the cans. We even ran into a shortage of chips for our vehicles. We couldn't buy trucks for new hires. So it definitely impacted us in different ways. That's for certain.
Yeah, definitely. And any thoughts, Juan, on some of the workforce issues too that maybe have come about? Some of those dynamics.
Due to the fiber, or due to
just in general, with the fiber, with the COVID, and all of that we're still reacting to and dealing with your ability to find a workforce to react.
Yeah, I mean, from a fiber perspective, you got new crews doing new fiber install. They need people, laborers. Utility locators make great laborers. They can run drill rigs. They can do a number of things. So that puts a strain on it just from new companies coming in and putting in the fiber. They hire our folks. The COVID was a whole different beast. We didn't know what to prepare for. Are the tickets going to drop? Do we keep the people on board? We'd hired a bunch of new training classes. COVID hit. We don't know what's going to happen. So we let those training classes go. And we ended up getting, at least in Virginia, more tickets than we'd seen in quite some time during COVID. So we didn't account for everybody being at home and homeowners doing more planning and grading that they could do themselves and not hire people. So there was a lot to it that we just couldn't account for at the time.
Yeah.
So both COVID and the fiber put a strain on the economy and for us being able to hire folks.
Yeah. Well, Richard, what would you add to that again from a locate side?
Yeah, I think we could all agree that there's been some really good technology advancements on the excavation side. So, modern directional boring rigs, able to do speed of deployments much faster than before. So that means, more footage per day, per week, per month. I'm not a big subscriber to the whole, climate change thing, but it does seem like there's a lot of bad weather. We're going through it right now. The entire South is just blanketed with rain, and it seems to be worse this year than previous years, and I'm sure it likely gets worse every year. But there's definitely labor constraints and trying to hire labor because we had a lot of different competing companies going after the same labor pool. And then I think an interesting one to look at, and one that the states might consider more, is around permitting. I see areas that have up to 17 simultaneous fiber overbuilds in a particular area. It is just wild. Now, most of those companies aren't going to survive because maybe 2 or 3 are going to get business, and the rest of them are just putting money in the ground. And I guess it'll get absorbed by the couple that win. But I'm not sure that it's prudent from a permitting perspective to allow all these simultaneous overbuilds to go on out there. It disrupts the community. It adds safety concerns, and then it puts stress on the labor force that's really untenable.
Yeah, no, very good points. And along those lines, Eric, going back from the excavator side, especially with like the permits and all of that, any thoughts on, from what you've been seeing on some of the other variables that have come to bear on us?
Competing initiatives, I think, is a big one, which is just another way of saying some of the things that Juan and Richard and James said. In Virginia, we had the regulatory replacement program for gas, and so being a state-funded program where en masse we were, and I say not en masse like Massachusetts, but like en masse, we're growing very quickly to try to address as much aging infrastructure as possible. Simultaneously, there's a ton of new development, which is a huge consumer of locating capacity. And then suddenly you get at the federal level an initiative for fiber, and these things are all competing in the same spaces, and there's very little synergy between all of the different mechanisms in place to kind of control a lot of that. And ultimately, I think in a very crude manner, it creates a strain that can only be solved by manpower at the end of the day. Additionally, from a quality control perspective, I think we've all seen a demand for a more competent employee around a lot of these things. So operator qualifications have become harder to come by, which has pushed folks that maybe historically were qualified to do a certain thing that now no longer can pass an exam and so are no longer available. As you make some of these jobs harder to get, obviously you're going to reduce the pool with which you have to work with, which just makes it that much more challenging. As Juan rightly pointed out, you bring people in, and he made a remark around, a laborer can also run a drill or can locate. I mean, from my perspective, I think locating is very nuanced. I think is very challenging to do the right way. So to just bring in any old person and simply teach them how to wave a sonde or how to electronically connect and look at a map, it may be much more complex than that. And so you're asking a bit more of the potential pool of folks that you're trying to onboard and train than maybe you were 15 years ago, which just completely, further exasperates the issue. So I think competing initiatives, drawing resources in a number of different directions, and then an exasperated labor pool based on qualifications is also just going to continue to make things a whole lot more challenging, certainly.
Yeah, no, excellent points. And within that context now that we're seeing, that there are some fiber issues, there's workforce issues, and a whole host of items that have come together in this way. And Eric, I might just let you keep talking and continue with you here, because I know your company has done some interesting things, with tickets and trying to address some of these issues. But for the group, and I'll start with Eric, what change do you think, if made, would have the greatest impact on late locates? What could we do? What one thing maybe that would have the greatest positive impact on late locates?
So I have several thoughts around that. One, obviously, as we just highlighted, I do think we have a manpower issue. I may be ignorant to whether or not some of these solutions are already in flight or maybe already exist. But I think that when there are initiatives that are drawing, large scale funding from the state or from at the federal level, there needs to be funding dedicated towards the growth and development within the municipalities and the locating areas and these different jurisdictions that they're working within. There needs to be money directly pointed towards the agencies that will then support these initiatives at a local level, i.e. the locators should receive funding in that local area to be able to grow and develop locators to better accommodate the growth initiative as they're coming through. But beyond that, you have to understand how delicate the 811 balance or process is and what role you play in it. The system is very much set up so that we all have to do our part in order for it to work. And if one of us does not, then it becomes a much larger issue. So when we got word in Virginia that things were going to change as it relates to over notification and kind of noise in the system, if you will, I felt it necessary internally to really take a hard look at the way that we were calling in tickets and examine our process, how we were tracking tickets, how we were updating them. And we developed we identified a pretty large bogey that I thought was pretty ugly and a pretty, bad tale to tell about our role in kind of wrecking this delicate ecosystem. And so we made a concerted effort to kind of kill all of our tickets in flight, which was no small thing for 45 some odd crews that are touching the street every day, and to kind of recalibrate our update process and to put some checks and balances in place, to make sure that the schedulers, the coordinating staff, the Miss Utility clerks that work for me are really not just updating for the sake of updating, and trying to reduce the scope of the tickets or reduce the total number of tickets to something more consumable, something that we can actually take action on and execute on without again, exasperating the issue. I'm going to continue to say that because that's what it is. As an excavator, I'm very much so like a consumer of widgets, right? Like I need as many cleared tickets as possible so I can go out and do the things that I'm doing. And if I get tickets that are late or are not responded to or what have you, sometimes the knee-jerk reaction as an excavator is to simply consume more, to give me more of an opportunity to pivot when something doesn't work out my way. And at some point, that you can't live like that, because Juan and his organization and the other locators, Richard, they're never going to be able to keep up with that knee-jerk reaction, and I'm just going to continue to create a cycle that's never going to stop. So at some point, you have to look at your own process and at least contribute something positive from your end, so that then it makes it easier to reach across the aisle and start talking about, solutions that can be grappled with together within this community.
Yeah.
Long-winded response. Apologies.
No, not at all. I mean, you're hitting, I think, on some important topics. I mean, for one thing, to summarize one point, yes, it's easy to say, hey, hire more locators. Okay. To do so is not as easy. Another option always is if you can't just hire more, you can also allow those that are in place to be more efficient. And what you said about how it's all of us working together to try to make that positive difference is true. We all need to be working together. And with your company looking at update tickets that aren't needed to be updated, if you can get those out of the system, get that noise, as you called it, out, then the locate team in place can do more. They're not being distracted. And so, yeah.
That's kind of also why I brought up the synergy between all of these different competing initiatives, because if I have a locator working in a busy intersection or working wherever, and they come in and they mark up this whole area for one guy, and then they leave, and then 3 days later, tickets are being called in for the next guy to do something very similar, where if, and I know that's a very small, tiny example, but if you brought all of these folks somehow together and had a system that better demanded a streamlined flow of information so that we knew we could send a locator here to clear out 68 tickets over the course of a month's time, so that all these different excavators can do all the things they need to do without sending these guys ping-ponging back and forth.
Right.
I think it will also help alleviate some of the stress on that labor shortage.
Yeah, yeah, and again, I just saw one chat pop up about knee-jerk reactions, and I think your point on how some of how we react exacerbates the whole problem, and I believe you even said makes it cyclical in some of these issues, and we just keep adding to it. So yeah, James, do you have anything to add from the excavator side on
Yeah.
that? On what would you say?
Yeah, I think I can feed off what Eric's saying. The company I just came from, we had a lady that sat in the office, and all she did, well, she done more than this, but part of her job scope was to update locates to make sure once foreman or superintendent called in a locate that it stayed updated until someone told her the job was finished. Well, sometimes the job would be finished, and to keep everything on track, and so she didn't have to call so much, sometimes she would update one 3 or 4 days before it was even ready to get them on the same scope. And then occasionally they would be a ticket get created, a whole new ticket for that, and then she was updating the same job twice or different things like that. Well, then I stood on one of these 811 panels in Mississippi and talking about legislative stuff. One thing that I brought to the table was, let's make it where we can never update a ticket. It's good for 21 days. Let's call in a totally new ticket so a locator's never had to mark the same thing twice, or work that's completed that we can all go on. Because, I mean, doing that, the contractors has a lot of fault with late locate, from asking locators to mark stuff that they done marked 15 times, and they get tired of coming out to the same spot thinking you're not working there. So there's definitely things in Mississippi in the law that has made that better and fixing that, but that is a problem that contractors was creating for locators.
No, great observations. And I would encourage, one thing we did, and I can speak to this with Eric, having been involved in some of what he did, having his team work with Virginia 811 to identify those tickets that are being updated. We can, the notification centers in your state should be able to look at, it depends on the platform they're on, the ticket entry platform, but they can run lists for a specific excavator. This is how many updates this ticket has had. And then that can at least give the excavator something to work with and go back in and check and try to clean some of the noise out of the system too. I know Eric does gas, and if he calls in a locate, say for a 3/4 of a mile of main, and you just come back and put 70 service and it's in a city, I mean, that one locate, you just keep updating until you finish all the services and everything else. And the locator comes out there and keeps marking the same stuff in a circle over and over and over and over. And it's, it can become a lot. So I get it. I get it for the excavator want to do that because it's easy. I mean, you just update the ticket every however many days your state's tickets are good for. But I don't know that that's fair to the guys doing the locate, especially if they had to remark somewhere that we're finished with. So I definitely think there's room for improvement on that. Well, and I am betting Richard and Juan are going to probably agree with a lot of. So Richard, any other reactions to that, but also anything from your perspective with what you're seeing that could be a change to make a difference?
Yeah, definitely. First of all, if every excavator out there had the same perspective as Eric and James, we'd have a much better ecosystem. So I really appreciate their perspectives. But as I listen to them, as a national operator, we're dealing with different rules and regulations across every state. We talk about update tickets. An update ticket in South Carolina just means that, hey, this ticket is going to be extended. The life of this ticket is going to be extended, so you don't need to do anything with it. But then there's a different type of update ticket, which is a remark ticket. That one we actually have to go back out and refresh the paint. But as you look state by state, these are not the same definitions. So, that's a challenge in itself. So we need some national standards on these definitions. And I think one of the biggest thing is project tickets are different than a residential ticket. Why do they all have the same parameters around them? Oh, you got 24 hours or 48 hours on a clock state or a midnight state. So 48 hours is not sufficient to go work because you only got a certain amount of daylight within there. So you might have 24 hours of daylight, and now I've got to go work a ticket that's a mile, a square mile. And there's a lot of locating to do. Some of these tickets take us months to complete, not 2 days. And that's just based on the pure scope. So I think if we could separate the rules for residential locates versus project locates, which, Virginia's already made a step in that direction. I saw that with your 12 days for the project tickets, which I think is fantastic. And you've limited the scope. That's not consistent across the United States. And I would say out of the ones that I've seen, you guys probably have the best rules in Virginia. So now I'm upset that I'm not there. So we want to get in there.
Well, and we have been very fortunate to have that change with now scheduling tickets. So you have the option to schedule a ticket, and Juan gets tired probably hear me say this, but I'll say it now in this venue that we do have, some evidence that you do, if you schedule a ticket, have a slightly less chance of having a no-show and a more notable less chance of having a code 60, which is the excavator and locator worked out an alternative marking schedule. So there is some evidence scheduling tickets is a positive step to helping. And Juan, do you have anything that say in regard to changes or what we've been doing in Virginia?
Yeah, really just kind of echoing what's been said. I want to applaud James and Eric's companies for their attentiveness to recognizing the issue and trying to help. I can speak for Eric and MPL. Once they reduced that flood of updates that we received on a 14-day basis, we felt that. We felt that in Northern Virginia for sure. So that was helpful. So, and one thing that's been pointed at for years is, just hire more locators. And that's what we've done, and it's not working. So one thing I want to point out is, reducing the updates to me is a way of reducing over notification. But that's only part of it. Over notification is also the work scope on tickets. Mm-hmm. And one thing that, Scott, I'm not sure if you're going to bring it up or not, that we're moving towards in Virginia is the virtual white lining. Mm-hmm. And that's a way of doing that, delineating the work scope. I don't need to know, or the locators don't need to know what the excavators want marked. We need to know what you need marked. So we can mark ahead of that. And, one thing, and I've got to point it out, with you saw at the advisory committee and we talked about it briefly, we had hundreds of tickets called in for installing fiber optic cables for an operator. And there was violations on all of the tickets. They drilled past water, they drilled past sewer, drilled past gas, drilled past power and phone on all of their tickets. So, I'm sitting there thinking on the advisory committee, why did I waste time marking those tickets? They could have been marking tickets for individuals that needed and respected the locates. Mm-hmm. So it's not just the updates, it's not just the amount of tickets, but it's also the work scope. Yeah. So, we're moving in the right direction in Virginia for sure. And as we said, that's just one small piece of it. We need the same national recognition on the issue.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, and Juan is mentioning there that we are in Virginia. We hope in 2 weeks having the ability to have electronic white lining, And we have identified standards for that and so forth. But yeah, it's going to include on the ticket exactly what Juan said, a way to really identify visually what needs to be marked to hopefully lower that scope, the time at the site. And again, then that opens up the locator to be able to serve more tickets, process more tickets. So we'll everybody stay tuned on that, and we'll see how that plays out. But no, some great observations about, some of the changes that are needed. One that's been alluded to, I think, in this conversation, but now maybe give you each a chance to expand on your thoughts about enforcement. Can enforcement have a positive impact on resolving these kinds of issues? And what would that enforcement look like? And at what level should that come from? And so forth. James, we'll start with you on that one.
Well, I think enforcement can always have an impact. I mean, if you start getting into somebody's money, their pocketbook, then that's definitely going to make changes. I mean, if you find somebody for stuff, but another thing enforcement can do is a lot of times until somebody brings it to your attention, you don't even know that you have a problem. So enforcement would be a way to bring certain issues to people's attention that they didn't even really know they have. I mean, I could sit here and complain about a locator. This happened, that happened, but until I go to him and say, hey, why, he might not even know that that's going on. So it's got a lot to do with communication, but enforcement, I mean, in Mississippi, we have a thing called an ABR, where you can write up. It's a write up that goes to the enforcement, and they look at it to see the next step of mostly like complaints that you saying that this is happening. And I've never actually filled one out, but after sitting through some meetings, it's like, I get it. I mean, the whole purpose of that is to let people aware of what the problem is and to enforce the problem more than it is about finding people and this and that. Is trying to get enforcement to enforce them to help make a solution to fix the problem more than it is to find people, I think. So I definitely think enforcement could be a big help in the issues.
Yeah, very, very good. And, Juan, how would you think of that?
I'd say enforcement's not just about finding and civil penalties. I think just as much as they need to enforce those, I believe that the upfront training in education is the other part of what I would consider enforcement. I think you need to educate everybody, every opportunity that you get before you start penalizing. We do a really good job of that in Virginia, or I believe so. I say that, and our no ticket rate's still higher than it should be. But we are looking actively at how to better educate, how to better advertise. And I think that's a big part of enforcement or regulatory enforcement, not just the civil penalties.
Yeah. Okay. Richard, what do you think?
I think enforcement's always important, but the first step to enforcement is having the right set of rules to be enforced. And I think a lot of our discussion today is focused on that. Do we have the right rules in place? Are these rules bifurcated between residential and project tickets? And the answer is no. In general, across the U.S., the answer is no to that question. We don't have the right rules in place. So a lot of the enforcement that's occurring right now is actually driving the incorrect behavior. So when I talk about 10% of our volume drives 40% of our labor, that's because of the lack of rules that are out there around ticket scope and ticket spray, and then us having to put labor on those, because if you don't, you'll end up with a fine, which then takes away from the 90% of locates that are coming from those residential homeowners that they're going to have to wait while we deal with these other big infrastructure projects. I'm not going to just call it fiber overbuilds because it's any infrastructure project.
Right. No, and I do like that. I think that's an important point that when we are looking at enforcement, we need to think through it. A lot of times you can put something in place that's an incentive, whether it be a positive incentive or a more the negative incentive of some sort of fine that can have those unintended consequences. So very good point. And Eric, anything you want to add to that from your perspective with enforcement?
I probably would piggyback a little bit on what Juan brought up. And I'm fortunate enough to work for a large organization, and we have a very robust safety and quality program, where we're studying KPIs and a lot of metrics around at fault damages and not at fault damages every year. And I'm proud to say over the last 5 years, we have almost no at fault damages around gas, but we drive down our not at fault damages as well. And I like to believe that that's because our folks are doing the right thing around questions if the locate marks don't seem to add up with what they're seeing in the environment, and they're studying records, and so they're trying to be proactive. And so I think that that's a big part of it, is you have to have people willing to go out there and do it the right way from the beginning. And depending on what the fine structure looks like, a fine to an organization my size versus a guy that's maybe much smaller and is operating a couple drills for fiber, it may have a very different impact on the two of us. And so there certainly has to be some synergy around the rules and the fine structure to capacity of the size of the organization, and obviously there needs to be levels within the different types of infractions. But I think there needs to be a willingness from folks to want to engage with organizations that have a very robust safety and quality program, that kind of looks to, internally, are you enforcing the rules there? Thusly, like the enforcement part of it, should be kind of looking at it from that perspective. Maybe not the best answer in the world, but I see it from both sides there. So
yeah, no, excellent points and insight. And we are getting close to some of the final thoughts. This has been a great discussion, but I have to ask this one question, because we are, when I hear you all talking about, I think Richard might have the longest tenure in the industry, 32 years, if I was hearing correctly, but everyone else is over 20 years. When you think about where this industry was when you first started in it, in regard to technology, and where we are today, we truly have lived through a revolution of sorts, a digital revolution, a communications revolution. When you're looking at all of the emerging technologies that are available or will soon be available, what role do you see these technologies playing in addressing some of these challenges? How will they help us address some of these challenges? And again, I'm including extended reality with AR and VR, the use of AI, and so forth. So Richard, maybe we'll let you get that ball rolling on that question.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, this has been an area I've been focused on for the last 2 years. If you think about it, we put paint on the ground. That paint fades after about 2 weeks, and we're left with no intellectual property. So we've been basically enabling our technicians to capture all the geo coordinates for every locate that we do, so that we can then provide map correction services, data services for engineering, so they can minimize conflicts as they're engineering their plant, open trench information to drive efficiency in deployments, using augmented reality to do remarks on paint, when we go out to do a remark, risk assessment on high profile tickets, so that we know which ones we need to go out there and do a post locate audit. We have all of our supervisors do around 40 audits per month, and selecting the right tickets to audit is all driven by AI technology. So we've invested about $20 million in this area to drive the use of AI and augmented reality and data capture and all the geo coordinates, so that we can drive damage prevention in a much more efficient way.
Fantastic. And Juan, how about you with technology?
Yeah, it's very similar. We've been using and we're developing a new ticket management system for the company to better utilize the new technologies that have come forth with, as Richard had mentioned, the RTK unit, we've deployed those and we're starting to use those same features and trying to find out what benefit we can have. The audit process is a huge one because it allows for real-time auditing. You can tell what frequency, the distance off the highest signal. You can do all that remotely. You don't need to actually physically go out there and check, but we're using that to drive our audits as well. GIS is going to be huge. It's constantly improving, and as operators and as call centers and as locate vendors are all using GIS, it would make sense to put them all on a similar platform. So I look forward to what's coming, because then you talk about your virtual white lining. We can overlay it with the operator's prints. We can put our electronic manifest on there. You can see that everything was done. So the future's bright. We just have to get there.
Yes. Very good. Eric, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think GIS is a journey that we're all on presently, and I think it's going to ultimately yield very positive results. I think one of the biggest problems that we have is that our records oftentimes are looking in the rearview mirror, and we need to be able to, as an excavator, we're very hands-on people. I need to have something in my hands that kind of tells me whether or not the paint on the ground actually mirrors up with what I anticipate I'm going to find. And then additionally to that, as we continue to put more and more things underneath the ground, I don't think it's unreasonable to expect that a locator is going to have a harder and harder time creating, getting a finite signal on every single utility. They're going to have drift. There's going to be things that are going to make things more challenging. So from a damage prevention standpoint, I think GIS is probably going to be, once we get there, we'll have a very large impact, for sure.
Yeah, fantastic. And James, your thoughts on technology?
Well, technology came a long way. I've been sitting here thinking if me and Eric could figure out how to Bluetooth gas, I mean, we could both retire next week. But we have guys that come out and pre-camera sewers to keep us out of sewer laterals and stuff, bored and such as that, and they'll come ahead of us, and then you can get an app on your phone. A lot of them's got this app you can put on your phone. You can pull up and see the sewer services and follow them on your phone and this and that. And I think if a contractor had that for all the lines that was in the ground, life would be so much easier. And I think there's technology out there that can probably do that, and various reasons we don't, but technology has definitely came a long ways, and I think it'll just keep on growing as time goes on.
No, I couldn't agree more. I think the whole technology piece could be a wonderful future panel discussion of some sort, but unfortunately we're just about out of time today. Again, we are going to collect those questions and have the panel answer them, and we can get that out. But to kind of close out, I'd love to hear each of your final thoughts, that if you were on a soapbox and you were screaming the loudest you can to the decision makers that be, whomever they are, what would you say to them in regard to the 811 process and how to improve it? James, we'll just let you keep going. What would you say to that?
Well, I think what we all should do is be more involved in meetings like this and help come up with solutions instead of pointing fingers at who's wrong. Let's figure out what's wrong and fix the problem. I mean, whether you're an excavator, you're a locator, at some point, one part that we're doing, we're wrong in it in some way. And we've got to educate ourselves on what we're doing wrong. And then we got to have, I guess, the backbone to stand up and say, hey, I'm part of this problem. I want to help fix it. How can I help you fix it? And I just think we all got to be held accountable for our own actions and what role we play in this. And that's the only way it's going to get better. It ain't going to get better at me pointing at Richard or Juan and saying, y'all the problem, y'all need to fix this, hire more people and get this done. Just like the white lining Juan brought up, we started doing that in Mississippi. I was totally against it because I'm thinking, well, I already call in locates on a computer And I was thinking, well, we just have to go out there and white line where we want to be and all this and that. So I'm gonna have to hire somebody to visit every job. But now it's virtual and you can do it on a computer. You don't have to actually go out there. So that's a big help. So I think we just all need to do our part.
Well, James, that is very nicely said. That would have, I think I should have ended with you with that. But it's good to hear about the virtual white lining and how it's going for you. Juan, what would you add to this?
I would say that, unfortunately, the problem of late tickets is going to exist until there's a way to match resources with demand. Once we solve that, we can probably get rid of these issues.
Very good. All right. And Richard.
Yeah, I'm gonna always fall back to the rules and regulations and how they need to align to the different uses of the system, whether they be residential or large infrastructure projects. And let's drive to some national standards so that we can have consistency and simplicity in our planning and implementation. And if we can do that, it will address the ticket scope and the ticket spray and the daylight hours and the weather and the labor constraints that we face on a daily basis. And those, that's an entire ecosystem labor constraint. And I think if we can do that, that is going to solve the problem. It's not an easy lift, though. I'm going to tell you, we've assigned a lot of internal resources in this area, and we're having to go one state at a time and go talk to the 811 centers in each state. If we could address this at a national level, it would be so much easier for everybody.
Okay, very good. And Eric, what would you yell from your soapbox?
I would say get in a room. Everybody get in a room, because right now, if there's no way for us to somehow create some harmony between all the different initiatives, state, federal, project-related work, the owners, the operators, folks have to be able to find a way to overlay what it is they're trying to accomplish in order to give the locating community and the excavators an opportunity to better, create some synergy and harmony with their resources. I think if you do that, you're going to make a positive impact. And then the last thing I would just say is, as an excavator in particular, and this is not me posturing, so please don't anybody think that I am, but look, we are consumers at the end of the day, and this is a pretty fragile ecosystem. And I can guarantee you that we play a role in creating discourse in this whole thing. Do the best you can to continue to hold your folks accountable, and do the best you can to constantly be examining your processes and your procedures. James brought it up earlier. We simply stopped allowing our folks to update tickets. We just did away with it. You have to examine production reports from the previous week and then update the language when you're calling in a new ticket to address size and scope. That's part of what we did, and I think it has made an impact. I'm not saying that we're perfect, but that's a step in the right direction, and I think it helps bring you to the table in a more honest way when you want to engage the locating community or the operators and talk a little bit more about what you need in order to improve, and so on and so forth. Just do your part. Start there.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, thank you so much, Eric, for those thoughts. Thank you, everybody, for sharing great ideas, great insights into these challenges we face. I think if anything, I hope everyone walks away with some energy and excitement about getting into more conversations. That's where answers are found, when we're conversing, when we're having dialogue, when we're showing empathy and looking at it from the perspectives of others in the industry and how they would feel under these circumstances. I think that helps, and the solutions are there, and I believe we can find them. And it's a noble mission that we're all on, damage prevention. So thank you all for all you're doing. Thank you for your time today. And with that, I want to thank everybody else for joining. Have a great rest of the week here, which we're coming up at the end, and everyone stay safe. Thank you.